This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Welcome into episode 161 here in the Huskies Warming House Podcast. Nick Max and Noah Grant here in the den once again to bring you a show in the second week of May. And of course, the NHL playoffs in full swing in round number 2. But some teams, I don't know if they're exactly in full swing. It's been a lot of confusion, I guess.
Well, if you're the Leafs, you're confused. You're in the second round.
Well, I mean, I don't know. The storylines, like, the statistical values, everything that kind of has led up to a lot of these matchups. I know the playoffs bring a certain level of difference, but it seems like this year has just been chaos times 7, right? Like it just kind of feels like it's just been an extra dose of unpredictable. So, but it's great. It's great for the game of hockey. It's great for the fans here. So yeah, we're going to dive into that. Obviously, take a look at some NCAA player moves. There's not much to report this week. Some USHL stuff. We might kind of focus a little bit on that because again, the USHL playoffs in full swing as well, too. Some NHL stars and awards starting to be unveiled here. So we'll kind of walk through some of that. And then we are watching live as we speak. We are recording this Monday night at 7 o'clock here. So we are actively watching the NHL draft lottery, and we are going to break that down before we get to the end of the main portion of the show. So stick around for that. You won't want to miss that. And then our extra ice session. Speaking of relocating players, how about relocating teams potentially? We talked the Arizona Coyotes once again. Of course, they're getting close to their Tempe bid, and also some rumblings about NHL expansion that continue to come up. Is Quebec City a destination? Probably not. Is Atlanta going to get a third crack at this? I don't really know. Is Houston actually an NHL city? We're going to discuss all of it and more in the show. So without further ado, we start as always with Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Center Ice View News and Notes here, Noah. And for this week, just when we thought the Ottawa Senators couldn't be more of a prized ticket to buy, it gets even more sweet. Last week it was Snoop Dogg and a group joining in along with another group that was, I guess the main head, right, is Ryan Reynolds. Not done yet, apparently, as far as the interest in this team. And now Canadian singer, is it Abel Tesfaye? Did I say that right?
I don't know where you're at. You act like I'm the savvy one. No, not me.
You know, everybody knows him as The Weeknd, right?
Yeah.
He's joined the Harlow Capital Group, which is led by a couple of Toronto billionaires, Jeffrey and Michael Kimmel. And they are now placing a bid to buy the Ottawa Senators as well. So now 3 prominent groups trying to get their hands on NHL ownership. And this is kind of interesting, too, because the Weeknd, who's a native of Toronto, in fact, just a suburb of Scarborough, Ontario, he's won 4 Grammys. Again, he also hosted the halftime show for Super Bowl 55. So there's some local interest here, right, for the Weeknd. So, and quote, the team he works with grew up in Ottawa, so they know the market really well, but he's the largest musician on the planet right now. He has the most views, the most streams. He's also a hockey guy. He doesn't like to be in the media very often. As far as him, you know, minus the music. But so this release is something that he wants to be part of a bid. He wants to get this deal done. He wants to build something that will be great in Ottawa, and he'll be a good fit. He's got a lot of connections worldwide. So this is coming, I believe, from a spokesman announcing his entry into being another bidder. Right now, mind you, this open sort of season, right, for bidding ends May 15th. So anybody or any group interested in submitting a bid to buy the Ottawa Senators has just about a week left before bidding does close. So this is kind of cool again. And, for the Ottawa Senators, Noel, get your quick take on this. For a franchise that really, as far as success on the ice, it's been a little bit to see three prominent groups led by some, shall we say, non-traditional hockey celebrity faces, kind of cool actually, in that you just hope that beyond the namesake, right, that they have some plans. I guess Ottawa needs a new arena. There needs to be some things that are updated with that organization. So you hope that it's not just the namesake that takes over the organization, but they do have some future plans for that team up there in Ontario.
Yeah, of course. The most streamed artist on Spotify, which is, you don't say that lightly, obviously. Someone who would understand the entertainment value and what it takes to put on a good show, right? I think we have to remember, us coming from the background of being hockey guys, yes, we're concerned about the on-ice product, and that's obviously a very vital piece. But, at the end of the day, the way you sell tickets is you market the brand, you market the exposure, you market the game. That's kind of what makes this all flow. And there's somebody who would have a very good understanding of how that works and what goes into it. As long as you surround yourself with people who do understand the hockey side of things too. A great problem for the NHL to have. We've kind of gone back to this, and I think the thing that's cool with Ottawa is, and this is no disrespect to other hockey markets, but it is a market where realistically the current Ottawa Senators have not been around that long. I don't think people realize that. But as far as Ottawa in hockey history, and of course, like early NHL hockey history, they have a lot of prominence when it comes to those sorts of things. So there's a lot to be done with that, where you can really tie a lot of pieces and make that, not that it's not already a good hockey market, but you get a new arena, you get new ownership, you get that team back to relevance. Suddenly you've got a hockey market that's very desirable for both fans and players. So that's something that they're building towards here. Again, it's a good problem for the NHL to have. I just, like you said, I hope we don't get to a point where the namesake means more than the process, because as we've seen in Ottawa in years past, the process was not exactly fluid and not exactly smooth. And both on the ice and off the ice, it's been kind of a struggle recently. So it's great to see interest in what would be the NHL's latest reclamation project up north, so to speak. And hopefully somebody's going to come out of this with a really good bid and a really good plan.
Well, this one team does not consider itself as a reclamation project, but it is sort of scratching its head, right? That is the New York Rangers. And how about this? Maybe some find this surprising, maybe not. Gerard Gallant and the Rangers have mutually agreed to part ways after just 2 seasons. Gallant went 99, 46, and 19 during his tenure with the Rangers. Side little tidbit here, too, and that is all 3 Jack Adams finalists from 2021 and 2022 are no longer with the clubs they coached at the time. The other 2 that were on that short list was Daryl Sutter and Andrew Burnett. So we kind of spoiled the next story, right? And that is, again, Daryl Sutter, maybe not so surprised, was fired. We discussed that last week. But maybe more shockingly is a couple of players took back supposed trade requests after the club did part ways with Daryl Sutter as their head coach earlier this past week. So I'm not sure if it's surprising that the fact that some players took back trade requests, Noah, but it seems like we're hearing about this more on the public side. And it's just not something that, at least in the hockey circles, you don't normally hear about, because there were, shall we say, indications that maybe there was, shall we say, what Daryl Sutter wanted out of his team and what the players maybe wanted their identity to be. There seemed to be some friction there, and this sort of not necessarily confirms that, but does show that leadership probably made the right move in the fact that they wanted change at the person that was behind the bench.
Yeah, not like the Flames have had an issue retaining their core in the past year or two, right? Yeah, bridge deals, not great. But yeah, I mean, Daryl Sutter, his firing, I don't know that it was necessarily all that surprising. I still think he's one of those coaches that has a home in the right market. Again, same with John Tortorella, right? A guy that fits in the right market, but for whatever reason, Calgary wasn't it. I don't think that this is particularly uncommon, though. The article kind of related back to exit meetings and interviews with players, with management, and they kind of flat out said, like, "Hey, I want to go somewhere else unless you get rid of this guy," kind of thing. And I think that I don't think that that is necessarily uncommon in the NHL. I don't know if it's that.
It's uncommon.
I don't know that it's that upfront or with that like en masse, so to speak, but.
I think what's surprising, though, was the fact that it comes like that piece of it comes out. I mean, there's reports on exit meetings all the time, but just rarely do you hear that piece of it where it's like, get rid of this person or go kind of part.
Well, usually you're not getting rid of your coach, though. So a lot of times you don't hear about it because, you might have 2 or 3 guys who are like, hey, we're not really satisfied with this. Well, what happens? They get traded, right? Or they do something. They're not, part of this big
agency.
They're not part of this bigger story, so to speak. The head scratcher to me is the one in New York. The Rangers, I've kind of had this mentality here, kind of this like shotgun trigger mentality where it's like you're hoping for this, this quick spray against the wall that's going to kind of give you some success. And if it doesn't work, you move on to the next guy here. And the Rangers, like, they're not letting the process play out a little bit here. And for whatever reason, Gerard Gallant.
What process, though? Like, and I say that respectfully. And why I say that, Noah, is remember, it's not that long ago where the Rangers via social media and then through season ticket holders sent out a letter that says, hey, we're going to be sort of retooling, rebuilding kind of thing. And I think they made some interesting moves, right, that accelerated that process. And I kind of feel like, and if you look at their moves this last year, right, bringing in Vladimir Tarasenko, bringing in guys like Patrick Kane, they made a bunch of moves at the deadline. They were going all in for a push, right? And they did not even clear the first round. And I think part of whoever this coach was going to be over the last couple of seasons, they were never going to be judged by their regular season record. It was going to be, can they take this Ranger squad, deep into a playoff run? And unfortunately, Gerard Gallant didn't. But to your point, I do also find it interesting that only after 2 seasons that they are deciding to part ways with a coach. But I get the sense that the process to me has always been, we're trying to win now. And they've been trying to disguise it as sort of a rebuild / retool. But if you really look back over the past couple of seasons and some of the things that they've done and not what they've said, I think it's been kind of a cloak. I really do believe that. I think they really have tried to do kind of a win now push while trying to sell the fact that we're trying to still, retain our first round picks, which they did, and also try to build with a youthful core. But then again, they just haven't been able to get over the hump, and you can't necessarily change the players. I think they like the players, but you can change the coach, so they continue to go that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't really know what the answer is. It's just
neither do the Rangers.
It feels like this is just kind of the new trend in the NHL, where I don't want to say it's premature, but guys are getting a really short leash in the National Hockey League in the coaching realm lately.
And here's the opposite side of that coin, right? We just talked about how in Calgary there was that report that made public, right? You kind of wonder too, where's there something to that same nature with New York, but it's just not something that's out in the media, right? It's always possible, especially when a tenure like this is this short. Mind you, there's some powerful voices within the Rangers, right? Some veteran players have got a big say. And again, with exit meetings, you just never know what comes out. Granted, when something does, what does upper management, what does ownership do? And you kind of wonder, is that a possibility? It certainly is. And maybe that's what it is, right? We'll never know. And that's why I said before, I'm kind of surprised that something that, shall I say, honest, has made it out, because normally that's kind of kept behind closed doors. I get the sense that this is something similar here in New York. But then again, Gerard Gallant, if we look back at his most recent coaching tenure, right, besides some miracle runs in Vegas, he really hasn't been able to hold on to something. And if I remember correctly, maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Noah, but hasn't there been some reports of maybe just a coaching style that Gallant has that, is also maybe sort of sandpaper-esque, or maybe I'm just making that up. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But I think it also goes back to the fact too, where, some of these young guys too, are they willing to be coached that way too? And I'm not saying that you need to, go all Mike Keenan on this, but at the same time, you need to, you kind of have to have that, the Herb Brooks, I'll be your coach, I won't be your friend kind of thing. You need to be able to kind of draw that line a little bit where respect is a little bit earned in some senses by the way that you play, but you also, are developing too. I don't really know. It's just, it's a weird process. The real question is, what happens to Patrick Kane and Tarasenko in free agency? That is an intriguing thing that we are going to go into.
I think it's more intriguing on the Tarasenko front than it is on Patrick Kane. Only because I think Patrick Kane has a limited group that he would go to, just because I know he wants to go to a deep playoff run. So it's more on his case. For Tarasenko, he's still a little bit older. In fact, he's 31, so he's not crazy. Still probably has a couple good years left, but again, it's what's going to be the command from him. I think more for him is going to be what he is going to ask for in a contract, whether it is, and it's going to be both money and term. And remember, he's sort of, I don't want to say overplayed his hand, but St. Louis also didn't want to lock him up long term. So I think it's more intriguing for him because I think he's got more time left. Whereas for Kane, I think he's looking for that last chance at a cup, and I think he controls more of where his destiny is going to go. And we'll see what teams are able to make that fit work.
Yeah. The Vancouver Canucks have been fined $50,000 by the NHL for violating offseason training rules for players this past week. They were holding on-ice sessions with players from April 17th through the 23rd after the season had ended, which is a violation of the current CBA. Dakota Joshua, Jack Studnicka were among 6 players that were doing on-ice training with Henrik and Daniel Sedin, who are the development coaches for the club. It's in the CBA, you can't do it, but I also think it's also kind of weird.
Well, didn't Arizona get caught with something similar and then they lost draft picks?
No, they got caught. They were physically evaluating guys during their physicals when they were essentially being hands-on with them during the physicals, and they aren't allowed to actually assess.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, the physical, but still weird things within the CBA. Like I said, I get it. This is kind of the similar thing where like in the NCAA or other college things, like we couldn't have coaches at certain points and, during captain's practices, so to speak. I don't know. I just think it's weird. It's like, the NHL season, the regular season's over, but like, if you want guys who are wanting to skate, like let them skate kind of thing. I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, the Vancouver Canucks, they're down, what would be, I guess, chump change for an NHL team, but a lot of money for the rest of us. Speaking of a lot of money for somebody here, the Tampa Bay Lightning, former St. Cloud State player Mikey Asamont, a 2-year contract, $800,000 per season. He's played less than a full slate of NHL games over the course of 3 seasons that he's been in the National Hockey League, a little less than 80 games. 102 points in 3 seasons in St. Cloud, had 79 in 3 seasons prior with the Fargo Force in the USHL. He started this past season with Winnipeg and was a 2016 5th-round draft pick of the LA Kings. So it's kind of been a long time coming for a player who has really had to work really hard to kind of earn the opportunity that he's had. He had a good playoff run, and now him and Nick Perbix in the same mix in Tampa Bay. I think that's obviously very exciting.
And Mikey Asamont, if you watch him, he is the perfect fit for John Cooper's system too. I think, his game with his speed, he was a water bug, man. He was really good on their fourth line. He earned that contract. Yeah, he's not gonna, blow you off the page with some points. But man, he is a perfect fit for what John Cooper wants from a bottom 6 player. And he's certainly, like I said, earned that contract. And congratulations to Asamont. That's well earned. And I think, again, a really perfect fit down here with Tampa for the former St. Cloud forward.
Yeah, it'll be good. 13-year NHL veteran Peter Klima died at 58 this past Thursday. Best remembered for scoring that triple overtime winner, Game 1 of the 1990 Stanley Cup Finals for the Oilers, who ended up beating the Bruins that year. 6-time 30-goal scorer, 573 points, and 786 career NHL contests with about 6 or 7 teams. So wishing his family the best through that difficult time. But yeah, kind of an interesting, you go back and you watch that goal. You start pushing into 2-3 overtimes. It's just, any puck's a good puck, on net, and one of the most memorable goals in Oilers history for sure. Mark Borowiecki retiring after 12 seasons at age 33, almost 500 games for him. Hasn't played in about 6 months. I don't know if anybody remembers, but that awkward hit against Philadelphia back in October, he was in the hospital. He went on IR. He hasn't played since. You got to imagine that was probably the nail in the coffin, so to speak, for his career. I mean, it just didn't look good. But he's a guy that, he started his career, really kind of found his prominence in Ottawa, and then of course finished in Nashville. I mean, there's a guy that, absolutely ate pucks for a living and just carved out a role. Being a reliable third pairing defenseman. It's just, he's a guy that, well, it took us about 5 years to figure out how to actually say his name appropriately. And then once we did, you realize that he's just, was a guy that, he kind of reminds me of maybe a little bit of a younger Nate Prosser in some senses, where a guy that's just continually, you thought, oh, maybe this is the year that he doesn't stick around. Maybe this is the year he gets pushed out of the lineup. And he just was a consistent, steady force and a good defensive defenseman that was always in the lineup. So, only 33 though, Nick. It's not young, but it's not.
No, and he's had some injury issues, including some concussion issues, which more than likely is what, as you mentioned with this latest news, probably, shall we say, made the decision, right? It stinks, but for Borowiecki, again, 12 seasons in the NHL, nearly 500 games. It's a heck of a career. Was on some pretty good teams in Ottawa too when they were at their most recent prominence back, 16, 17 was probably when Ottawa was last, high up as far as the Eastern Conference is concerned. So a heck of a career. Sad it has to end like this, right? You never wish a player has to go out like this, but overall, great career for Borowiecki, and wish him the best in the future.
Yeah, sounds like he wants to get into coaching and development, so I'd imagine he'd probably do pretty good at that. Final topic here, injuries, both with the Toronto Maple Leafs right now. Ilya Samsonov questionable after that injury in Game 3 against Florida, so we'll keep an eye on that. The one that kind of everyone has been buzzing about recently, though, Matty Nyes, of course, out indefinitely, probably for the rest of the series at least, should the Maple Leafs do something crazy that's only been done 4 other times in NHL history. Of course, he's out with a concussion. It's interesting because obviously no supplemental discipline coming from that. I don't know if you got a chance to see the hit, but but it was the initial hit certainly wasn't the issue. The actual hit against the boards, I think people had an issue with kind of grabbing him and falling down with the body weight backwards. I don't know. I think at maximum I could have seen at maximum 1 game maybe, or a fine, but I don't think it was necessarily clean, but I also look at that and say I chalk that up to guys being in the moment in playoff hockey and a guy being in an unfortunate spot here. Did you see that any differently?
No, and I think, when you watch them go down to the ice, right? I think it's different if, he is pushing him down towards the ice, if there's actual force being applied there. Like you said, it's kind of a weird situation. Yeah. And you could even argue that when they were going to the boards originally, there was a little bit, like you said, it wasn't perfectly clean, but also wasn't perfectly not clean either. And I think you said it right in the head. It's sort of a playoff hockey type situation where, again, the board battles, these are the trenches, right? And I just think for Nyes, just unfortunately, just the way that the play ended, right? And you just hit the ice a certain way. Ask Joe Pavelski. Apparently, he's had a few instances like that too, right? So sometimes the original play isn't clean, but then when, shall I say, the end result or the end of that play happens, it makes it look worse than what it is, right? I'm with you. I think if anything, it was going to be a maximum 1 game. Obviously, player safety didn't think it was a suspendable play. They did fine him, if I'm correct on that. I think they fined him $5,000 for the play, but didn't find anything that they deemed to be suspendable. Like I said, I think if he's extending or puts force into the ice as he's falling, I think that would up it to a level of suspension. I didn't see that. I don't know if you did. I just so.
It's just you got to realize the Department of Player Safety, for how inconsistent they've been, though they still operate within the parameters of the rule book. And what I mean by that is, on that play, what you could have called is 2 minutes for roughing. There was nothing beyond that you could call. So you can't really go from that to trying to assess something greater than a major, so to speak. And when guys go into the corner here, like I said, you're not intentionally trying to hurt someone, but you are trying to kind of gain that edge. So if you have a guy who you get tied up with them and like you're falling backwards and you just have an opportunity to like bring your body weight with him and bring him to the ice with you, you kind of do those things because that's just kind of like
take the body or take the puck, but you can't leave with zero, right? That's just it, right? And beyond that though, was it maybe excessive? Probably.
Yeah.
As far as the carryover, again, the initial hit, say what you want about it. I wasn't too concerned about it, but it was more of like the fact that they still kept hanging on to each other than falling, and seemed like Bennett was more of the aggressor in that situation, right?
Yeah.
That's where it's become sort of that gray area, right? Which is, okay, how much do we let go? But then we go back to playoff officiating, which means whistles are in the pockets, right? And, we can call it for one.
Or the notepads coming out of the pocket while somebody's getting punched in the ribs and the kidneys. Anyway,
how about that? I wonder if he was trying to get a UFC fight so he could pay off some debt. Anyway.
Yeah. Take the over on that one, maybe. With that being said, we are going to head on over to the main portion of the show here where we start with some college hockey news. Welcome into the main portion of the show, episode 161 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Nick Maxon along with Noah Grant here. And Nick, second week of May here. This is actually, I don't know what the show is going to look like behind me starting next week. I am actually at about 2 hours after the release of this show on Tuesday morning. I am actually moving into my new apartment. So it's been a long weekend of packing and getting boxes together. And
unfortunately, you're still in North Dakota, so I can't really celebrate.
Yeah, but I'm higher up in the air now, so I mean, I might be the largest tree in North Dakota. I don't know. But
a small tree.
I'll tell you what though. I did get a chance to. Yeah, you're one to talk. You're like one of those little. Here's the thing. I did get a chance to tour the new hospital that I will be starting at next month, though, which is a $523 million hospital, and it is one of the nicest hospitals I have ever seen. And I don't say that just because it's where I'm going. It's just, I would say besides Mayo, I don't know that there's another hospital technologically that's looked as good as that one. I think that there's certain hospitals, especially
that kind of helps.
Well, I think there's certainly hospitals within the cities that, maybe have more specialized equipment or more options for care just because, that's where the population is. But as far as state of the art, up to date workflow, you'd be hard pressed to find, I would say, a better hospital in North Dakota right now, at least as far as the technology side and the up to date side goes. I mean, it's a beautiful building, so really excited about that one. But other than that, I mean, it's completed my classes last week. I officially
you walked the plank, huh?
Well, we're about to on Friday. Yeah, be interesting. Hopefully I don't trip. But you know what? This is like my third college graduation in some capacity, so I'm ready to just
ready to be done.
But Bachelor's of Science in Nursing. Very excited for that, obviously, and starting work next month. So, but we will be here to cover what's going to move into next month, which of course will be the NHL playoffs. Before we get to that, we track some college hockey news here and USHL news. Let's start with the NCAA player moves, I guess. Here on the men's side, nothing really new to report in the NCHC at least, so kind of a quiet period as of right now. Women's side here, Duluth. I don't know if we mentioned this. Olivia Wallen from Penn State, 33 points in 38 games as a junior. The Bulldogs add her. Calla Frank headed to St. Thomas from Mankato for her fifth year in the net. Can't remember if we mentioned that one either, but one I know that we didn't because this one is new. Mackenzie Bergeret headed from St. Cloud to Mankato, had 1 point in 37 games last year as a junior. Of course, former guest of the show, by the way, a couple years ago. I don't know, Nick. Of course, Mankato finished below St. Cloud in the standings this year. I mean, you look at the point production, and when I say point production, 1 point of production. I
got the single versus plural. Yep.
Thanks.
For most of the listeners and viewers, I'm sure.
I mean, I don't know if it was a question of ice time, but maybe a question of role, essentially.
Possibly.
trying to be in a more elevated role in Mankato. Wishing her the best, obviously, but kind of just trying to wrap my mind around where this is at. I was looking at, of course, it's graduation week in St. Cloud too. So looking at players like that are in the portal, like Olivia Savard. Of course, she just finished her degree, in education. Heading to be a teacher. Still thinking about opportunities, for her as like a fifth-year player trying to enter the portal. Thinking about, where her degree is maybe taking her and kind of opportunities that related to hockey as well too. So, but yeah, Mackenzie Borgeray, an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think Borgeray, when we've covered her not only on the show but also on the ice too, you kind of get the sense that she's, if anything, right, for Borgeray, I've seen her score, was it a hat trick in one of the games? And so she's got some flair, she's got some skill, but then as you saw with the point total, I'll steal your line, just for whatever reason wasn't there. And I got the sense from watching the lineup go in and out of St. Cloud. Now, mind you, it wasn't just her, right? There was a lot of jumping up and down from Brian Idalski, again, just kind of laying down his vision of what he wants his team to be. And yeah, it seemed to change on any given night. He just wasn't afraid to mix things up. And, maybe that was it, right? Maybe it just wasn't a fit for Bergeret. And maybe, again, like some of these other gals, was it just wanting a different role? Was it that, okay, this is what St. Cloud hockey is going to be. Maybe this is something that I don't like, or, could be a number of reasons. But at the end of it, I think for Borgeray, and also for a player, right, she had plenty more points in her sophomore year than her junior year. I think for players, they will, they'll probably tell you if they're honest with you, right, that does hurt a little bit. And maybe she's just looking for a fresh change of scenery because maybe she feels that's what's going to kickstart her and maybe get back to some totals that were higher in previous seasons. Number of reasons, right? But as you mentioned, all the best of luck in Mankato, and see if she does end up getting a more elevated role again as an upperclassman, and maybe just stylistically, maybe just a better fit for the way that she plays the game. We'll see, but hoping that she has success down there with the Mavericks.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, getting ready, like we mentioned, we're just starting the main portion of the show. Did just get the notification, though, of who did win the draft lottery. God, the NHL is rigged, man. I'm sorry.
Is it Chicago?
It is Chicago, man.
No way.
Oh, my God. That's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous, man.
It's right on cue, though, because you got Kane and Taves both, sunsetting essentially. And yeah, Bedard.
Terrible. Anyway,
which means who got number 2?
The Ducks did. Yeah.
So they're getting Fantilli then.
Yeah.
That's another really good player, by the way. So they also need defense. Anaheim can't defend, so who knows?
I hate this place.
So, in other words, what you're saying is the Minnesota Wild are never going to win a Stanley Cup because now Chicago, in a couple of years, right? Oh, right when the Wild get out of Stanley Cup hell, they're probably going to be ready to contend for another playoff spot again. Got it.
Yeah,
you heard it here first, folks.
Hey, I mean, on the plus side, though, you put together the right package. Minnesota could afford Connor Bedard's shiny new contract in 3 years.
There's no way.
I don't.
Last time I checked, Chicago's going to have a lot more cap money than we will. just a little bit.
Yes, because they've been a perfectly transparent organization. Anyway,
right. On the flip side of that, though, beyond Connor Bedard, who else do they have? I mean, realistically? I mean,
come on, Patty Kane's coming back, man. No, he's not. Anyway, we'll dive into that at the end of the main portion of the show. As far as I can tell, we're going to keep an eye on this one. The Fargo Force, of course, lead their series against the Lincoln Stars 2-1 here in their best of 5, I believe. It is now 2-2 right now. Yeah, just a minute, 8:19 left to play in period number 1. 2-2 is the score. A bit of a more high scoring one here tonight to start. All 3 of the games have been 1-goal contests. In fact, the first one, 1-0 victory for the Force with less than a minute to play in that one, a real goaltender's duel. Then of 4-3 was the other night that the Force won, and they lost, I believe, by the same score in night number 2. In Fargo. So, of course, they're in Lincoln tonight. Should Lincoln win today, game 5, of course, will be later this week. So, but Fargo, it's been really good, the USHL playoffs, and talking with a couple of guys that cover that team, too. They just talked about how it's been an absolute war, and this Lincoln team has been no slouch of an opponent here.
No.
1-0 and 3-2 in games 1 and 3, Fargo wins. They lose 4-3 on home ice in game number 2. Game 5 would be this Thursday, May 11th, if necessary. So keep an eye on that one. But this Lincoln team, again, has really given this Force team fits. So, speaking of the Fargo Force, though, the great news that we came out of St. Cloud State Land, former assistant coach for the Huskies and former player Nick Oliver winning USHL Coach of the Year in his first season at the helm. No surprise. I mean, just an incredible season that he had. I mean, I just had it up, and of course, then I just clicked out of it here. So let me pull it back up here so that I don't misspeak here. Yeah, 44-23-0, a .657 winning percentage, 40-22 in the conference, 22-11 at home, 19-11 on the road. An impressive season for him. Like we talked about, we've mentioned it multiple times. He's not going to be in Fargo for long, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing. He's going to get a shot at the next level if he continues to stay with the pace that he's been at. So, anything you wanted to add on that?
We talk about Nick Oliver and his coaching and whatnot, and obviously he's earned that accolade. But I think what makes Nick Oliver such a great coach is his communication with his players. He really does connect and care about the players. Again, we heard that from Brett Larson. We heard that from Dave Shayak when talking about Nick Oliver. He has all the makings of being a head coach, not only at the junior level, at the Division I level. Or I could argue that with his career trajectory, he will be in the minors or possibly an NHL bench in the next 5 to 10 years. There's no question about it. He's just that good. And a lot of it is just because he listens, right? He approaches players as individuals, also, projects things as a team, right? But he just knows how to connect and get the most out of his players. He develops relationships. And so, again, no shock from us. He's a hell of a coach. He's a hell of a human being. And we hope that this trend continues for him. He's going to get, if not after this year, for sure next year, he's going to get a lot of calls from shall we say, programs that are going to be a little bit higher than junior hockey for him to be heading that department. So congratulations, Coach Oliver. You've done a fantastic job and continue more success in the USHL playoffs.
Yeah, the job's not done, right, for that team. So it's going to be a long road, obviously, to what would be a Clark Cup. So, wishing him the best of luck, like you mentioned. And you look at Nick too, in talking with my buddy who's one of the head rink guys there. He talked about how that entire coaching staff and obviously the players too, a couple guys that we skate with in the summer, just a good group of guys, good coaching staff. Yep. They're really good to guys off the ice, really good to the rink guys around that are helping get the ice set up and things like that. And I think those things go a long way. And we've talked about this, and that mentality that's been instilled, with Brett Larson at the Division I level. You walk down and obviously, there are times when he's busy and kind of when you can insert yourself and when you can't. But with Brett, usually if he's got the time for you, and even if he doesn't, he's still going to be cordial to you and try to give you his full attention. And I think that's something that goes a long way, because there's a lot of coaches at that level, especially, that kind of, I don't want to say act like they're bigger than that, but they look, I don't want to say they look down on people, but there's no other way to say it, where they kind of feel like they're doing their own thing and that everybody else is kind of catering to them, so to speak. And in some senses, that's what happens at that level. Right? But, being grateful for the opportunity and making people feel valued outside of the initial players and coaching staff, I think just goes a long way with, media reporters, rink personnel, that sort of thing. And Nick Oliver obviously has definitely carried that through in his coaching tenure as well. Moving over to the NHL playoffs here, the second round, of course, the only game going on tonight on Monday is the series that is still tied, Vegas and Edmonton tonight, just getting underway in about a couple of minutes here. Other than that, this Stanley Cup playoffs has been confusion, especially the second round. I thought the first round maybe would have given us the most intrigue, but it continues to get crazier here.
It really topped the first round after the calamities that we saw there.
If you want to be fair, there is still something that can happen in this second round, although statistically a 2.2% chance of it happening. That could make this second round really crazy.
Toronto's not going to do it. Just going to say that.
You start with one, though, right? If they can put together the next two, then you start to think,
then you worry if you're Florida.
Yeah, then you start to think you can maybe get it to 7. And like we talked about, there's only been 4 teams in history that have ever come back and won a series from 3-0 down. Only once in the Stanley Cup final, ironically enough, the 42 Toronto Maple Leafs. Can't remember who the team in the mid 80s was to do it, but then of course it was the 2010 Flyers against Boston, who of course they were down 3-0 in game 7 against the Bruins that came back in that one. And then of course the LA Kings the year they win the cup, beating San Jose, and Sharks fans still haunted by that one.
Yeah, they'll be haunted for a while.
But I would wonder what the statistic is of teams that have pushed a 3-0 deficit to 7 games, not regardless of winning it, just gotten there. Because I think even if Toronto gets to that point where they can push it to 7, and even if they lose, you say, okay, fair play, right? You pushed yourself back from the brink and you gave yourself a 1-game chance.
You didn't roll over. Yep.
Yeah. Toronto obviously, is going to have their best game of the series in game 4, which is funny because, the game the other night, where they lose in overtime, obviously losing Samsonov too, it was probably the closest game out of the 3 they played. And it was probably Toronto's worst game that they've played. So, you just kind of felt like the Leafs were maybe due for a little bit better fate, but then we realized, oh yeah, it's the Leafs. But I think from a personal perspective, and then I'll get your thoughts here, I'd really love to see Toronto push it to at least 6 games, because there's been so much for that fan base and so much for that core that's kind of talked about, oh, they're this and that, they're not good enough, they just can't whatever, this and that. And we all know this, where yes, in the playoffs you have to bring your best effort, but you also need to bounce, right? Toronto wins that game in overtime, we're having a much different conversation than the conversation we're having today. And I think for that core, just getting them to a point where they at least give a commendable effort through the rest of this series, I think would go a long way. I really don't want to think about the Leafs if they lose game 4, because it's going to be anarchy, and everything that they just did to erase a 19-year first round, move on drought will be
and that's
erased.
Thing, right?
Yeah.
I was going to say, let's take it one step further. If you get swept out of the second round, I'm not sure that you look at it any differently from a management or an ownership standpoint.
Yeah.
They've been bounced in the first round. To your point for game 3, right? Close on the scoreboard, yet O'Reilly, Matthews, Marner, all were very, shall we say, absent from the shot chart. They have
David Kampf and Eric Gustafsson led the team,
which is fine, actually, right? Because you sometimes in games and in series, right, you talk about depth scoring and how that sometimes has to get you over the edge, right? But it can't be your only contributions, right? You're paying Matthews and Marner a lot of money for these types of moments. And, not to say that again in the playoffs where they're going to get all the attention. And here's my second point. You got to really tip your cap to Florida, man. To be able to essentially to slow down these top guns of Toronto is no easy task. And also, holy cow, has Sergei Bobrovsky been really, really good at times when they have had some great chances, which granted has not been often, especially, if I go back to game 3 and Matthews had that, just that little bit of space, and it wasn't a lot. Samsonov essentially had to jump out of his crease, and he just caught it with the shoulder. It was in the third period. Is probably their best chance of the entire game. But in overtime, again, it was all Florida. It was really all Florida, which they controlled the pace. They controlled the shots on net. Really, when it got to extra sessions, the Leafs just looked gassed, right? So they need something right now. And again, it's not a 0% chance they come back. It's very low. But why I'm so confident it won't happen is, again, when you look at game 3 going into overtime, they just did not look like they belong on the same ice sheet. They just looked like they were checked out. Not to say they were, but they were gassed, and they just really weren't generating anything that was going to be successful Maple Leaf hockey, which is on the forecheck, putting pucks on net, and allowing your guys like Marner, Matthews, O'Reilly, Tavares to work their magic. William Nylander also. A bigger question mark is with Samsonov out, right? Granted, Wall came in and held him in that hockey game. He played extraordinary, really, really well. He has earned, that start for game 4, but you kind of wonder what adjustments Toronto is going to have to make to be able to get guys like Matthews and Marner more opportunities to get the puck on net. You almost kind of wonder too with the Maple Leafs, and I'm curious to you this, and Noah, and because they talk about how you can generate the passing plays in the regular season and how you're not defending the same way as you do in the Stanley Cup playoffs, right? To me, this is where Maple Leaf hockey, that brand of hockey, has its troubles, where it's just a more simple game, right? And that is just get your butt in front of the goaltender, make him not see it, and make sure you get it through. And I feel like the Maple Leafs are that pretty passing type team, and that just is not usually conducive to being successful in the playoffs. Am I crazy when I say that, or are you noticing the same thing?
Well, I mean, I think the thing with Toronto is their ability is knowing that teams are going to try to shut down that high-flying offense and still being able to create it anyway. And here's the thing. If you have a team that I don't want to say is not willing to make those plays, but you look at the top six for Toronto, that's just not their style of play. Like you mentioned, their bottom six, definitely. I mean, the camp line, and credit Sam Lafferty, that was his best game of the playoffs as well. They are as advertised for exactly what you're talking about, guys going to the front of the net, crashing the crease, filtering pucks through, that sort of thing. But if you're Toronto, really where it starts for those top units is getting Florida's defensemen to pinch at the blue line, to step up and become flat-footed when you're in transition. And if you can do that where you're getting pucks out of the zone and you're creating plays off the rush in transition, that's where Toronto really has success, is they're able to spring those skill guys and create odd man rushes, and then it leads to either a goal on the rush or extended zone time, because now you have a team scrambling, coming back, you start this suffocating offensive cycle, and that's kind of what Toronto's game is. They really haven't been able to establish that. And I think besides the fact that Toronto might need David Ayers to come and save them, the thing with Florida, actually, on the other side of this, the best thing to ever happen to the Panthers, weird take here, Alex Lyon, because I think
you're not wrong.
I think if the Panthers somehow beat the Bruins in 5 games, right? I almost feel like Toronto's a little bit more ready for the onslaught they just came through with. I mean, you look at the scores, 4-2, 3-2, 3-2 in overtime, right? I mean, the scoring spreads have not been large.
Right.
But Florida is this team who barely eked into the playoffs, had a really rocky season.
Sounds like another team, like the 2012 Kings.
Well, it's just they're one of these teams that, again, I go back to this point, they're almost too dumb to be realized that they shouldn't be controlling games, or they should be out of hockey games, and they believe that they're the better team. They believe that they're the team that's going to win. And I'm not saying that every NHL team doesn't believe that. If you don't, why be in the playoffs? Minnesota Wild. But with Florida kind of being masked in the first couple of games, thinking that they were looking like they were out of it against Boston, and suddenly they come back and it looks like they have this dramatic comeback, which they did against the best team in the NHL this season. Toronto isn't looking at that thinking, oh my gosh, this Florida team is absolutely rolling. Like, here they are. This freight train is coming. It was, okay, the Panthers, maybe they just kind of got lucky. Maybe they just kind of got through that round with the Bruins. And then it was like, no. This Panthers team is ready to go, and you look and you're down 2-0, and suddenly you're gripping the sticks too tight. You give up a game winner in overtime in game 3, and suddenly you're going, shit, we're in trouble here. And
to your point with Florida's defense, they haven't been flat-footed on their own blue line. They haven't been, shall we say, stepping up, and shall we say at least, knocking off the Leaf forward, bringing the puck in. I think that's been the biggest thing, right?
Radko Gudas has been turning people into tables and chairs, though, according to the NHL officiating crew.
Yeah, right. But I think that's, to your point, though, that's what Florida has done so well, is that they've not allowed Toronto to utilize the rush on their top 6, right? They just haven't been there. And I think without that rush sort of, for that top 6 to have no success right now, you really got to tip your cap to Florida. And they're packing in the middle of the ice. They're not allowing them to get into the house, into those areas in front. And Bobrovsky, despite the fact that at times he does leave some rad rebounds out there, there's 5 red jerseys within like 3 feet of where his crease is, right? So usually if there's a rebound, there's a red jersey there to clear it if there is one. So it's going to be tough, because Florida has been sort of playing this defensive style that against skilled teams, Boston and now Toronto, that's been very, very effective. And again, we keep going back to it. Defense wins championships, right? It's showing here. Boston was arguably the most talented team up and down its lineup, they're gone. Toronto, we know the names we've talked about and how, lethal they can be if they have the time and space. They haven't gotten it here in the series. They're going to have to, or else they're going to be, again, joining the Wild on the golf course somewhere around the North American landscape. So, and I don't know, do they have a chance against Carolina or New Jersey? Can you imagine that resume? Could you imagine being Carolina and New Jersey looking at Florida going, holy SHIT?
Well, let's talk about that series too.
Yeah,
and here's
seriously.
the thing. So Hurricanes Devils, right? Carolina outscores New Jersey 11-2 over the first two games. New Jersey wins 8-4 in game number 3, despite giving up 3 shorthanded tallies against.
Yep.
Here's the thing. This Hurricanes Devils matchup, these are the top 2 teams that give up the most shots per game in the NHL playoffs right now. So again, you talk about that defensive structure. Again, the team that comes out of that Florida-Toronto series, and again, I will throw them both in there, has a better look against both of these clubs than I think I would have originally given them credit for. Both teams, their goaltending tandems have been interesting in terms of their cycles, to say the least, over the course of the playoffs here. I don't know what
you said. David Ayers, he did kind of win it for Carolina.
I don't know what to think about this series, to be honest with you. I think, like you said, the favorite now is coming out of that Florida-Toronto bracket on that side.
Just saying, it's going to be Florida. Just say it.
And I think on the other side of this, I'm not necessarily convinced. I'm not saying it's not going to be, but I don't think it's going to be the quick punch that everyone says it's going to be. I think it's going to take a little bit. I think it's going to take 2 or 3 games for the Panthers. That's all I'm saying.
4 or 5, I call it max.
But I think the West overall has the more intrigue. That Stars Kraken series, I know Seattle trounced the Stars in game number 3, but still, that series has a chance to go to the distance, and so does Vegas and Edmonton. Yes. The challenge for the teams in the West is going to be to not beat up on each other too much to when they finally get to the Stanley Cup final, whatever team comes out of there is too broken to put up a fight against these teams. I tell you what, you look at the games ones of both of these series. How about the fact Draisaitl has 4 goals, Joe Pavelski comes back and has 4 goals, and both of those teams lose.
Yeah.
Edmonton's power play right now is at 56% entering tonight's contest.
Oh, is that good?
I know penalty kills that are worse than that.
Well, like the Wilds in the playoffs? Yeah. It was pretty close to that number, actually.
Yeah.
It's sadly more true than we want it to be.
Yeah, but like we said, I mean, Seattle leads Dallas 2-1. This Kraken team, like I said, a very defensively responsible team. Both of those teams, very good clubs this year, and I think that's where Minnesota fans take it with a grain of salt. I know the finish of the series was not great. Dallas is a good team this year, and so is Seattle. Vegas, I'm still not sold on them right now, to be honest with you. Edmonton, the question is, how much can their firepower continue to sustain them? Basically, if they can keep bringing the 50 cals out and keep on firing, they're going to be fine. The scary thing is for teams that rely on that offense, the Toronto Maple Leafs,
Boston Bruins.
That's what happens if it suddenly disappears. So the NHL playoffs as a whole, obviously we'll have a much better analysis as we move into next week, because most of these series will be approaching the end or be finished, depending on what bracket or what sunny state you're in, apparently. But Nick, I mean, any kind of closing thoughts on the NHL playoffs so far in round number 2? It's been wild.
How about Seattle, man? Actually, a lot was. I mean, they were starting to get some national respect about the defensive structure, but I think, with some of just their forecheck has actually been a bit surprising to some people, and how effective it's been against the Avalanche, right? And then now, yesterday, we really saw the second period. Again, Ottinger did not look his normal self either. Granted, I was shocked that they didn't pull him a little bit earlier. They did before the start of the third, but after that 5th goal in the second, I really was scratching my head of why they just didn't get him out of there, because I think he was rattled again. It was kind of a shot that off Benier's stick that I think, had he got a full follow through, I'm not sure if it goes where it went. So I think it did kind of fool him a little bit. But yeah, that one's been widely intriguing. Again, the back and forth between Vegas and Edmonton has been kind of fun to watch. But holy cow, Draisaitl, geez Louise, him and McDavid are just machines. To say
18 points in 8 games for Draisaitl, 13 goals in
That's
that tally.
ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
As my co-host will say, is that good?
Yeah, I mean, in the way the NHL playoffs have gone, this team is going to lose in the second round because reasons. That's just the way things have been trending.
Because Mark Stone, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be the most NHL thing ever? Mark Stone carries the Vegas Golden Knights to a conference final, tears something in his back, and that's that, right? I mean, that's just
Seattle goes on to play the Florida Panthers in the Cup final, which 99% of people. I joked about this last week. It's starting to look more and more likely than I think any one of us thought it ever would be.
I guess the question I'd have to ask in that case is, do you favor land or do you favor sea? That's
oh boy, I don't know.
Oh my! If the Seattle Kraken win a cup this year and Connor Bedard gets selected by the Chicago Blackhawks, I swear to goodness, Nick,
it's the FBI in.
It's a bad thing that I have now risen the height of my apartment. I'm just going to put it to you that way. Kidding. But maybe not. Anyway, moving on to the NHL awards here. Very quick topic that we're going to kind of roll through here, but there are a couple that we've already started to hear from, one of them including a Seattle Kraken player. So let's pull these up here. We will start with the Calder Trophy finalists here for the NHL's top rookie, Matty Beniers of the Kraken, Owen Power of Buffalo, Stuart Skinner, by the way. Not often that you see a netminder in the conversation here, so I think this is kind of cool. So Beniers, league lead among this particular class in goals with 24, led rookies in points with 57, even strength points with 46. Pretty good average ice time, a little over 17 minutes a night. Skinner has been great, a .914 save percentage for him, 29 wins on the season. Owen Power leads the Buffalo Sabres defense core in ice time, outpacing the next rookie, which is Jake Sanderson, actually, the Ottawa Senators, by 2 minutes in that category. 31 assists for him, 35 points in the back end. So a pretty good season for Owen Power as well, too. I think it's hard to argue Matty Beniers and just what he's brought to that Kraken club. I mean, all three have been very deserving, but I just think,
to me, it's down to two names. It is Stuart Skinner and Matty Beniers. Not to take anyone, like we said, with Owen Power. He is going to be quite, the stalwart on that Buffalo Sabres blue line for some time. But the one thing why I'm intrigued by Stuart Skinner is, again, Jack Campbell. He was supposed to be that missing piece. He's supposed to be that goaltender that actually could stop a puck for the Oilers in the playoffs or at a time that mattered. And he just wasn't that way. He just wasn't, right? And then he gets hurt, right? So then Stuart Skinner comes in with all this pressure, and he's basically, now it's his net, right? So, it's and that's why, to your point, I'm so glad that there's a goaltender in this mix, because I really do think, where would the Oilers be if Stuart Skinner wasn't there, right? I think there's an argument to be made, especially with the goaltender in the conversation, because like you said, hey, it's hard, right? Because a lot of the Calder is the points, it's the flash, it's the goals, it's the skill, right?
I was just thinking when you said where would the Edmonton Oilers be without him, and I would say winning games 9-8 in overtime. I don't know.
Yeah, also possible. Well, I'm trying to remember. Is it Victor? Victor Fost would like a word. Yeah, he was one of the old netminders. I mean, gosh, there's a list that goes a mile long.
The last great. I mean, don't even throw Devin Dubnyk when he was there in Edmonton at that time. Really, the last great goaltender that the Oilers had was probably Dwayne Rolison.
Roley, the goalie. Yeah, because wasn't he backstopping their cup run in 2006?
Yeah, it was him, but then he got hurt. Remember, he got hurt.
That's right. He got hurt.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and so it's, to me, there's a chance for Skinner too. I really, and I say there's a pretty good chance if Edmonton goes to the Cup final, maybe, even though that there aren't, the votes are already cast, I think, aren't they? So maybe not. I don't know. I think it's between those two. Beniers is the obvious pick because that's.
But I think it testifies to the point where Seattle and Edmonton can make the conference final. And I think there's kind of your case in point for both of these guys getting a chance. So, I totally agree with you in that regard. I think it's going to be one of the two. I think Beniers is probably the safer pick, so to speak. But it'd be interesting to see a netminder win win that award. I wonder when the last time a netminder has won it has been, to be honest with you.
Or a
But
Calder. I know this. Wasn't it Ryan Miller?
I could see it being Ryan Miller.
I'm gonna
trying to
double check
think.
that. I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah. Would Andre Vasilevsky have had a chance? Although Vasilevsky was
Yes.
probably with somebody who was an unreal goal scorer, I'm sure. But I mean, why
I'm
don't we
pulling
try
it up
this
right
thing
now.
called Google
I got
goalies
it right here.
to win the Calder?
Andrew Raycroft.
Oh my gosh, gross.
That was 2004, and that's actually the first year, if I remember, that Ryan Miller was in the league. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Let's see here.
would have been Andrew Raycroft. Yeah,
Of course, good to see a lot of defensemen show up on this list. By the way, of course,
and then
Moritz Seider,
Evgeny Nabokov, the old Sharks netminder back in
2001,
the
yeah, Marty Brodeur in '94,
Belfour 91, Tom Barrasso in
Tom Barrasso,
84.
yeah.
Not many. Oh, Ken Dryden in 72, Denny Potvin. So yeah, it's not a lot, right? Because again, it's more on the skill and whatnot. So if a goaltender is, I guess you could say that the goaltender on this list have gone on to have some pretty good careers if you won the Calder. So
Right.
maybe minus Raycroft, but that's fine. So
yeah. Nick though, 1939, Frank Brimsek, Boston Bruins. Come on, man.
you're just on this Boston Bruins kick, aren't you?
Oh, you don't know the significance of this, do you? Frank Brimsek,
No.
I believe, is a St. Cloud State grad, if I'm not mistaken.
You really?
Yeah. So, I feel like we covered that at some point, probably way over yonder when we were both younger.
Yeah.
Anyway, speaking of guys who aren't necessarily young, well, two of them are anyway. San Jose Sharks veteran Erik Karlsson, New York Rangers defenseman Adam Fox, Colorado Avs blue liner Cale Makar are the Norris Trophy finalists. Nick, I'm curious to see if you have the same mindset. For me, I don't think this is any contest.
You have Erik Karlsson, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, come
You
on.
said absolutely, but you shook your head.
No, I said absolutely.
Yeah,
like
you did this. You shook your head. Yeah.
Of course it is. It'd be incredulous to think it would be anybody else. And don't get me wrong, Fox had 72 points this year, was a great year. Cale Makar, obviously a great hockey player. I mean, Erik Karlsson, on that terrible Sharks team who they only had two players the entire season who finished the season with a 0 plus minus. Everybody else was in the negatives, and the two guys that did played like 3 combined games.
Yeah.
So I think, to have 101 points and finish 1 point behind Elias Pettersson for 11th in league scoring as a defenseman. And someone made the comment, they were like, oh, well, he was minus 26 this year, so how can you consider him for this award? I'm like, plus minus is only a valid stat if it goes against the reflection of everybody else on your team. Like if everybody else in the Sharks was like plus 12 and he was negative 18, yeah, okay. But unbelievable, man. What a year.
Yeah, the one I might have a hot take here. You kind of wonder if the Sharks season drags his voting down a bit. And I'm not saying that to discredit Erik Karlsson. I'm saying that it's, to me, I think some trophy voters, you wonder if they look at the team's success as part of their voting. So it wouldn't shock me if Adam Fox got a few more just based on that. If you're talking about best season, Erik Karlsson for sure, right? But you kind of wonder if there's an influence there. We'll see, but it wouldn't shock me if it did not go to Erik Karlsson just because of the team that he was on.
Here's the thing, though. This will be Karlsson's third Norris Trophy, and it's his best career year to date. So I'm like, if he can win the Norris twice with, you know what I mean? Like,
no, I get it. And like I said, it's not my take, right? I think we're both in agreement that Karlsson is, the obvious choice. But again, we're not the ones submitting the votes. And you kind of wonder, just from what we've seen sometimes in the past, that maybe the player that's got the better numbers is slighted by the team he was on. So I'm curious to how the voters saw it. I know that he was getting a lot of love especially to the trade deadline. There was talks, would he be traded out of San Jose? Again, that contract is just not movable with that cap hit. Yeah. But you kind of wonder if that stuck around, or when we come to voting time at the end of the season, does that lack of team success creep in? And, some of the other names like McCarr, who, again, fantastic defenseman, and Adam Fox, who has won a Norris himself before, too. If that creeps in, as, the shift in the mentality changes more to playoff contenders versus the best player.
Yeah, Fox won it a couple years ago. McCarr is the reigning defending player. Who is the last Norris Trophy winner to win back-to-back Norris Trophies, Nick? Any idea?
I should know this.
You were alive, so
that's a wide gap. Let's remember this. Ryan Leach?
No, a little bit more recent-ish. Nick Lidstrom. Yeah, Nick Lidstrom. Three-peat in the mid-2000s. So Cale Makar, if he wins it, would be the next. So, but three guys very deserving, multiple awards between these guys. So no surprise that they continue their consistent play. Of course, all starts with coaching, though, right? Our final award that is early as of right now. A couple of former NCHC coaches in this, by the way. Jim Montgomery of the Bruins, Dave Haxtell of the Kraken, and Lindy Ruff of the New Jersey Devils were the finalists for the Jack Adams Award for the best coach. That is a judge to have contributed the most to his team's success, aka they were really good. Nick, if the Bruins get out of the first round, I think it's Jim Montgomery, no question. But I think given the success of the Seattle Kraken and the turnaround from last year, I think it's pretty hard to say no to Dave Haxtell.
I still think it's Montgomery's to lose.
And I wouldn't be shocked just because of how good the Bruins were this season. But what Dave Haxtell has done has been incredible. And for a guy that really didn't find a home in Philadelphia, granted, not a great team for him, and a lot of question marks around him, he's finally found his groove.
Right. The one thing that is different with Haxtell that to me puts him a little bit below Jim Montgomery is that Kraken team also had a little bit of reconstructive surgery too. They got some more weapons this offseason, which I think complements not only their defensive style, but also that means they can strike back, they can transition the puck, not taking away that the job of Haxtell's done. I want to make sure I'm clear on that, but Jim Montgomery had largely the same team. So to me, when you can have it's more on the coaching to me, if you have a similar roster and they make that big of a jump. Now, granted, the one thing you pointed out, I think, is, again, does the lack of playoff success hurt him in this voting? It's very well might could, and if it does, it is indeed Haxtell to lose, but I still find it very difficult for the voters to not award a Jack Adams winner that set NHL regular season records. That to me might be the nail in the coffin, regardless of the playoff lack of success, shall you say. But either way, kind of cool to see two former NCHC coaches to be, at the highest level of NHL coaching, to be, looked at as the best coach in hockey, and both deservingly should be there in that final three this year.
Yeah, good to see Lindy Ruff in that conversation too, by the way. He's kind of had a journeyman suitcase career as of recent, and good to see him kind of find success in
he's kind of been an up and down, right? Where, again, with Buffalo, right? Where, when Buffalo was back in its heyday, right? That was kind of where they were, a consistent playoff contender. Then he's kind of had some, shall I say, some stops along the way, as you said, and it's kind of seemed like he's found a niche back in the East Coast again with New Jersey, again, stops in Dallas, and I'm trying to remember if he had another stop in between the two. I'm sure he did, but has found a groove here and is looking to get the Devils back even here against Carolina after making it to the second round. So kind of cool for him too, because he's been around and has coached a lot of hockey games.
Yeah, certainly has. We move on to the last topic in the main portion of the show, the NHL Draft Lottery, and we can't wait to talk about this one.
The hockey gods, again, for the Minnesota Wild. And it's funny. So at work today, I was joking with a client of mine, and I said, watch the Blackhawks win this because, again, big market, Kane and Taves era is essentially dead. It's gone. And I more said it as, imagine in 2004, and you probably don't remember this, Noah, because you were still trying to learn how to read and write. But this team was actually being talked about contraction, about moving them away from Chicago because they didn't have a stretch of success for a long time.
The only player they had that was good was Eric Daze.
Tony Amonte, maybe.
Yeah, Tony Amonte was pretty good too, yeah.
But either way, too, when they weren't superstar caliber players. Now, mind you, the NHL was about to transition its game also 0405, right, to be more of the skill first. And you probably don't remember this too. I'm actually gonna test you in this. Do you remember the 2-line pass rule?
Yeah, it wasn't until the lockout that they switched it because you literally couldn't pass from your own zone across the center ice line.
Nope.
Like,
it was
ridiculous.
The dumbest freaking rule in the world. And before then, it wasn't touch up, offsides. It was still, if it just happened, it was blown dead. So, and why I bring that up is I think I think a really cool extra ice session would be to look at some of those rule changes that I think people forget about from 0405 and that lost season, and to how that really catapulted the NHL to be more of that skill based team, how it really has changed the NHL to what we are seeing now. Because back then, it was still, you had to be big, you had to be somewhat of a bruiser, right? And if you're a skill guy, you better, be ready to take some hits here and there, right?
2004-05. I'm just still stuck on the parallax goal for the Calgary Flames.
I know, right? Holy cow. But going back to Chicago, come on. I mean,
I know.
In the Central Division, right? And, it's just like, because he's going to make an immediate impact? Sure. Now, there's still a lot of pieces that he can't do it by himself, right? And he's going to have a couple of years where he's going to have to try to figure it out, and they're going to have to build around him, right? So it's not immediate, but if you time it out right, that means right when they probably are going to be assembling a decently good contending team, the Wild are just going to be coming out of cap hell, and let's say Kirill Kaprizov was going to need a new contract. So
maybe this is a hot take. I think he could have 50 points next year.
Bedard?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a hot take.
The only thing is who's going to be around and be that supporting cast. I think if you put him on a good hockey team, it's no question. But so yeah, Chicago does pick number 1. Anaheim gets number 2, and then we go down the order. Columbus, San Jose, Montreal, Arizona are your top 6. So beyond that, Philly, Washington, Detroit, and St. Louis round out your top 10. Crazy, St. Louis is drafting 10th this year. Vancouver at 11, Arizona at 12, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Nashville, and Calgary. We talked about it, or maybe we didn't talk about it. There would have been a statistically astronomically small chance that Arizona could have picked 1 and 2 in this draft, but obviously did not happen. Here's the thing. I mean, you look at these franchises: Anaheim, Columbus, San Jose. All 3 of those teams really needed a superstar, and I'm not saying Chicago doesn't. I think, as Wild fans and seeing the success that Chicago had in the early to mid 2010s with their 3 Stanley Cups, and obviously, the great core that Kane and Taves and Hossa and Patrick Sharp and guys like, Keith Seabrook, Corey Crawford, right?
Crawford. I mean, you mean not Anthony Niemi?
Yeah, it's been and Nikolai Hobby Bullen. No, it's been a while.
There for a year. Yeah,
it's been a while. Oh, don't forget, Dustin Byfuglien won a cup with that team in 2010.
He was part of that big offload because they were so much over the cap.
Andrew Ladd. Dave, how about Dave Bolin scoring the cup winning goal and then essentially being traded out? Gosh. Stu Bickle, by the way. So that's the thing is I know that we saw that success from Chicago, and of course you have the whole off ice stuff that we've had over the past couple of years. But really, Chicago has not been a great team for the past 5 or 6 years. I think that is fair to say, where they are a team that has really struggled. So as much as I hate it, it is good for that franchise to be relevant again, and it will catapult that and jumpstart them to being relevant in the Central again. I really hate it.
No, and here's something else too. Whether it's Bill Guerin, whoever is going to be the GM, when we get out of cap hell, I still think it's going to be Guerin. Now with Chicago, with Bedard, and they can now build another legit contender. I would think that, if Bill Guerin's watching, he's also pounding his fist too, because that's going to force his hand a little bit, right? Because, and again, we talked about this, I think, a little bit, both on and off air. Like we see who the player is, because they're already signed long term. So Freddie Gaudreau, Matt Boldy, Kirill Kaprizov, and who am I missing? you go Joel Eriksson up front, and then basically it's what Brodin and Spurgeon in the back end.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it's a wide open checkbook, right? And now with Bedard going to a division rival and knowing that it's going to take him probably 2 or 3 years, but after that, it's going to be like, oh gosh, this team's going to be scary good, right? You're going to have to try to make your run right there in 25, right? You're going to have to go chips all in. So you kind of wonder too if that advances a little bit of, or I don't want to say change, but make sure you have enough either assets or cap space to make a good push in 2025, 26. Because otherwise Chicago in 26, 27 is going to look really scary.
Yeah, they still need a lot of pieces, though. I really like the approach that Kyle Davidson has had. I think he's going to be a good GM in Chicago. You know, you look at his quote. I mean, he was pretty startled at the fact that they were able to pick first overall, too. And I think that he does bring a good infusion from that good old boys club that was there that kind of tainted a little bit of what that organization was. So you'd like to see them kind of reset here. Of course, the draft June 28th and 29th at Bridgestone Arena in Nashville. Nick, the Chicago Blackhawks have only picked first overall one time before. Any idea who that was?
Patrick Kane.
In what year?
2006.
You're close. 2007.
Was it 7?
Yeah, but very good guess. Very good guess. So, the Hawks win the draft lottery. Of course, second overall will likely be Adam Fantilli.
Right. First since wasn't Eric Johnson first in 06?
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Now he's like a third pairing seventh defenseman for that club. But Adam Fantilli, Michkov as well too. I mean, there's another guy that has kind of been floated around. So here's the thing with drafts too, that I know that Ducks fans are probably screaming at their TVs or have been, but
Fantilli's still a hell of a player if they pick him.
Here's the thing: is sometimes picking first or second, it's great, especially in this draft. Like Connor Bedard is an unbelievable talent. I would be shocked if he doesn't assimilate to the National Hockey League. But sometimes picking like 3 to 6 is where you can find these diamonds in the rough, where you don't feel like you're forced to pick the best available on the board based on a season or two that a guy has had. I think of one of my favorite picks of all time, and I know that even the board, when they were going through it live on draft day, was a little bit stunned at this pick. But then you watch the video that they showed in like the draft package on TV, and you could see right away why this pick was made, even if it was still kind of rough around the edges. Moritz Seider a couple of years ago at 6 overall, Steve Yzerman goes off the board and everyone goes, what the heck is he doing? And then they showed the package of this defenseman who was just powering around guys, a big, strong body, good skill, good hockey IQ. And you're like, he's not NHL ready, but boy, he will be. And look how that pick turned out. And I think about picks like that. You look at guys, Miro Heiskanen, who unfortunately got hurt the other night in the Dallas game, right? You look at some of these guys who are picked at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, sometimes pan out a little bit easier because yes, they're a high draft pick, but they're not number 1, number 2. They're not, they're not Slafkovsky. They're not Shane Wright, where there's this feeling of, oh my gosh, like I have to be that guy. Yes, you're a high draft pick, but I just feel like the process is a little bit easier for some of these teams. I would not rule out Columbus, San Jose, Montreal, Arizona, Philadelphia having some really good picks, especially in a draft this deep. It's going to be interesting. Did you want to add anything else related to our draft lottery coverage?
Here's the thing with Anaheim picking second. You've got a couple of guys up front, right, that you really like in Trevor Zegras, and why can't I think of the other guy that they just got last year from Team Canada?
Oh my gosh, hold on, I'll find it.
Yeah, I'd be curious if they want to add another forward, or do they go defenseman, because they really, besides Cam Fowler. And he's sort of, he's up there in age too now, which is shocking to say because I watched him his rookie debut. But they don't really have a bona fide number 1 defensive prospect.
Are you talking about Troy Terry or Mason McTavish?
McTavish, yeah. McTavish is who I was thinking.
Max Jones too, Maxime Comtois, a couple of young guys on that team. But
defensively, right, isn't, most of their guys just aren't like what you call number 1 prospects, right? And I think part of their big struggle this last year is, they could score, but they also could not keep the puck out of the net. And for John Gibson, he needs some help in front of him. He really does. you kind of wonder what his future in Anaheim looks like too. Geez, he's had to deal with a lot.
Well,
but
I mean, just looking at some of those teams that just need some help. Arizona's another one. Final question in the main portion of the show here, Nick, and I just want to run through it very quickly here.
Sure.
Logan Cooley.
Yeah.
Where does he end up?
Ooh. Well, it's funny because a couple months ago, there was Craig Morgan, who was a reporter in Arizona, had mentioned that, at least reported that he had told his agent he was signing with the Coyotes after his freshman season. And now apparently that's either changed or that wasn't accurate. One of the two.
I think he's running it back, man. I really do.
So do I. I get the sense that if he hasn't signed already, then he's got to be coming back to the Gophers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for him too, with Arizona, and just again, the so-called the cycle of fun with Arizona just doesn't seem to end. There's no rush for him to get there right now. There really isn't. And especially if, gosh, in a week, if we're talking about how Proposition 301 or it is failed, oh boy, right?
Or on the flip side, if Arizona had gotten Bedard and you say, oh, I'd love to play with him, right?
Does it change something? Yeah. So to me, I think he's going back to the Gophers. Again, if he hasn't signed yet, can we both at least agree he's an NHL caliber talent? He could easily fit into
top
Arizona's roster.
Sure. Yeah.
Like right now, if he signed, absolutely. So to me, knowing that, and we're in agreement on that, if he hasn't signed yet, he's coming back.
Yeah, I agree with you too. But speaking of coming back or maybe leaving, we're going to talk about that Arizona franchise and everything that goes on with the Arizona Coyotes. And welcome into the Extra Ice Session, episode 161 here in the Den. Nick Max and Noah Grant here, just hanging out, talking hockey. And the Arizona Coyotes are hanging out, waiting for their fate on May 16th or thereabouts, essentially, as to what that Tempe proposal is going to look like. I guess preliminary thoughts here, Nick, before we move any farther than that. What do you think? What do you think we're going to hear in about a week and a half?
Oh boy. I don't know, honestly. And I say that because
thanks, you're useless, man. Just kidding.
Well, that's not new. But I'm not as confident that they pass this, and here's why. Oh boy. There's something we said about, the people who have come down to express support for it, right? Bettman was down there a couple of weeks ago. Shane Doan has come out. There's been a lot of the city of Tempe even has kind of said, hey, this project goes through. This is not on us. This is a privately funded, totally enterprise. The problem has been is there's been a pretty largely organized campaign against this thing, and a lot of misinformation, a lot of false information too. So, and why to me that's such a big deal, especially in that market with that ownership group, is there's a lot of Arizonans and people in Tempe that don't still trust this ownership group. The Coyotes themselves have been a troubled franchise, and whether it's the current owner's fault or not, right? Maybe it's not new, right? So I'm not as sold. I'm just not, because this Coyotes club just has not been able to find that break that they need to just be like, yeah, we're here to stay. This is that ticket. The question is, do the residents buy that sell, right? And that's where Arizona's, to me, that as a state that on many different fronts is kind of a wild card in these situations, right? And again, the recent history, the recent news of Coyotes not being able to pay their taxes and being able to pay rent on the building back in Glendale, right? All of this stuff is in the voters' minds when they talk about this, right? So the question is going to be, just from a simple step, does this fan base, does this city want this did this happen, right? Does it help that it's not just an arena, that there's going to be apartments, there's going to be an entertainment district, there's going to be hotels, right? It's not just a Coyotes proposal. It's more than that. I think that helps. So if you had to ask me one or the other, to me, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think, and I don't think it's going to be a big margin. I think it's going to be slim, but I do think it does get through.
Yeah, you got to believe that the NHL is concocting some sort of something to try to do everything they can in that market to hopefully, I don't want to say influence, but trying to do what they can.
Well, and let's be honest, right? We've talked about it from a college hockey perspective. This is a college hockey podcast. How we've been wanting and needing more than just Arizona State, right?
Right.
Teams to essentially put forth a Division I program in neighboring cities like San Diego and UCLA, Oregon. We've talked about them before. UNLV, right? There is a bigger hockey influence than just the Coyotes that is on this boat. There really, really is. And if people wonder why the NHL has stuck its flag in the ground and been stubborn to move it, they know it too. You can't have this hole between the California teams in Vegas and the next closest team would be what? Dallas and
the Texas teams.
Colorado,
yeah.
right? So they need that to be a placeholder if this game is going to succeed and hold its ground in the Southwest. The best news is you've had the Kings win a couple of cups recently, right? San Jose for a large part of the 2000s, 2010s was a perennial playoff contender. Went to the Cup final. Was it 2017 against Pittsburgh? 16. Okay. Yeah. And then the Anaheim, they won a cup in 2007. So you've got some winning franchises down there, right? You've had success. Arizona hasn't had that. But again, they need to have a presence in that state. So to me, there's more on the line to the NHL than just a team and its ownership. And I just want to be in this market. No, to me, the long, shall we say, the way that this game lasts in the Southwest also rides with Arizona keeping the Coyotes. I really do feel that way. And we saw it, right, with all the voices that came out in support of it. So I think it'll pass. It's going to be close. And thankfully, if it does, now don't get me wrong, the NHL, has a backup plan for this. If they don't, question is, what is that? We won't know until it fails, if it does, because secretly they're trying to come up with either some kind of appeal or some sort of different proposal, because they're going to fight for this until there's no options left. And supposedly, if this fails, there's a plan B/plan C that they could do that involves, I think, Native American land somewhere close to where it is. But again, we've largely not heard much about that, but I think it does stay. What do you think?
Well, I don't really know that I have a feeling either way, to be honest with you. I think it's just kind of Arizona Coyotes, the continued sludge that is their PR campaigns, right? Like,
it's weird, right? It's like you would think we would have a better, gauge on the temperature of this, but
yeah,
it just feels like
maybe that is the temperature. Maybe lukewarm is the temperature. I think that there doesn't have to be. I also think about the idea too. Think about when Vegas first was getting ready to get a franchise, and we were kind of like Vegas, like they haven't really had a sustainable sports market. Like they've got a lot of quirky things, and now we look back and we're like
a hotbed.
Yeah, now we look back and we're like, why the hell didn't this happen 25 years ago?
Yeah.
But hindsight is 2020. It's easy to be the Monday morning quarterback, right? So,
and the big difference is the right ownership group with Vegas, right? The NHL also went hard with it. They've had early success too, which helps. I mean, making the Cup final in your inaugural year, where kind of like the sweetheart NHL story also helps. Whereas Arizona really never had that, right? Now, granted, they came in a different time of the NHL. We've talked about the struggles of previous ownerships, both with money and both with reinvesting in the team. And then of course the arena kerfuffles, the city of Glendale on top of, Gila River Arena. I mean, they've had roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, right? And if this proposal does go through, you think that most of the, the shackles come off, right, of the organization. You would think, but the other side of the coin is now the spotlight goes right back to ownership, right? Which is you've got the building, you've got state-of-the-art this, and it's not a college rink anymore. That's good.
Right.
But now you've historically not spent money. In fact, you've taken on essentially dead contracts so that way you could be cap compliant, but your actual salary spent is minuscule. Now it's your turn, right? So I think maybe, and that's going to be the next part of the conversation, is if this does go through, this building is built and the Arizona now has a permanent home for the next 30 years. Now does ownership follow task and actually reinvest in the squad? They've got a lot of young talent, a lot of high level young talent that's coming in that they're going to have to pay to keep them around. They'll have to do that. for Arizona to be essentially far and away from what they have been over the last 10, 15 years, because I think their last playoff big run was 2012.
2012. It was the year that Dustin Penner scored the game winner in Game 5.
Yep, that's what it was. Yep.
So regardless of how this shakes out, and regardless of if Arizona would move or would stay, there's been a conversation regardless about other cities that have kind of would be a viable destination for the National Hockey League, whether it would be the Arizona Coyotes or the possibility of moving to 33 or 34 teams potentially. Houston obviously has been talked about. Quebec City has not been given up by the NHL, but I think because of it being a small market, there's a lot of logistical challenges with that and the Canadian dollar. There
challenges.
Yeah, the Canadian dollar is a challenge. There is a guy on YouTube by the name of The Hockey Guy, by the way, that I would definitely encourage listening to kind of his thoughts on it too. He just does a fantastic job. I love his delivery because it's so unique. It's so like, I'm a bit of an older guy and I own every bit of that and watch my product kind of thing. I love what he brings to the table.
It's very wise too. With Quebec City, he doesn't mince words, but he says it softly, right? Yeah. It's like, you speak softly, but his words carry a big stick. Maybe that's the way to phrase it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas he's just going to give it to you how it is, right? And the conversation around Quebec City has been around since the Nordiques left, right? Mm-hmm. They built an arena, was it 7 years ago?
Yeah, which was the big issue when they of course left. They were getting ready for those new jerseys that had the Huskies on them actually too, and then it was like, well, they're realizing that it wasn't this massive drop, but they were steadily losing revenue, and it was like, this might not be viable. And the concern was not only with Quebec City, with most of the Canadian markets, where the thought was we might be a fully US based league because of where the Canadian dollar was at, and
it was tanking.
Yeah, and I think, there's been talk about a place like Kansas City, which I don't think is like necessarily out of the question. And then of course Atlanta too, who has generated interest, especially fan interest as well too. And I think when you talk about like Quebec City, I feel like the NHL would have to be at a point where they want to bring in, 2 or 4 teams, and Quebec City is part of that package where they're not alone in trying to make that jump. Also, don't forget about the fact, too, that it is so expensive to bring in a National Hockey League team. When the Wild came in, their buy-in was $80 million. Now you're looking at $570, $600 million.
50 was for Seattle.
Exactly. So, but the conversation that I think is most interesting, and it's part of the headline on the graphic here for the YouTube channel, is Atlanta, because they had the Flames until 1980, who of course became Calgary. The Thrashers then of course became the Winnipeg Jets 2.0. And now there's a conversation about them getting a third NHL team, which is like totally unprecedented in league history. And at first you hear it and you go, not a chance. No way. But then you think about, why did the Thrashers fail all of those years ago? They had a poor on-ice product because they couldn't retain good players because, like you mentioned to me pre-show, they gave them all away, basically.
They didn't want to pay for them. No.
But really, Atlanta struggles with the fact that there are fans down there that really enjoy the game of hockey and want a hockey team down there. They struggle with the PR and marketing the game of hockey to fans who are unfamiliar with the sport. Let's be real. Georgia, Atlanta, basketball, football markets, and not necessarily a traditional hockey market. Yeah. But with that being said, you teach them the game and you give them a good on-ice product that they enjoy watching. I don't think it's actually out of the question that Atlanta could have a good hockey team, but you need the right management group and you need the right game plan and mindset to be able to reach that target market, because it is a big market. It's just not a hockey savvy market. Talk about Vegas, talk about even Arizona. When Arizona has been good, people have been there, but I don't think that the Thrashers 2.0, Flames 2.0, whatever, I don't think it's outrageous.
So maybe you made the parallel, but there's a lot of similarities to Arizona and Atlanta in terms of non-traditional hockey market. Mm-hmm. Fans maybe not seeing the NHL as, shall we say, they just don't understand it, right? But more importantly, it's important to the sustainability of the game of hockey, right? We talked about the hole that would be in the NHL map or hockey map if Arizona left. There's a hole in the Southeast, and it's Atlanta is the bullseye of it, right? And let's take this one step further. The University of Alabama, a little bit further away from that, but guess what? They've got club hockey. There's a lot of club hockey.
Club hockey is huge down
right?
there.
So
Oklahoma, yep,
So to me, it's you said management, yes, but to me, right ownership has got to be number one for Atlanta. And I think what's more encouraging about this proposal is that this didn't come from a city. This came from a group, an investment group that says, we want to make this work and we're willing to invest in the building. Phillips Arena, which did house the Thrashers, was not the best building. It was not the best location in terms of just fan experience, right? So this would hopefully address that. But more importantly, the ownership group, if I understand it correctly, they were bought and sold. The Hawks and the Thrashers, they were bought together. And the previous ownership group essentially bought the Thrashers just because, effectively, right? Whether that's 100% true or not, I don't know. But there seems to be, smoke where there's fire. And that is, if you look at what that, franchise did, it didn't retain any of its great players that it drafted. It never reinvested in the team. And then when they weren't getting the ticket sales, right, then they started to kind of panic towards the end. By that time, it was too little too late, right? So I think more importantly, if you have an ownership group that's willing to, again, address the arena, which there is a proposal out there, has just been a proposal. There's been, if I understand, no, legislation as far as let's talk about this. So anything like officially moving forward on it.
And don't forget the challenge too, league expansion or relocation. You put a team in Atlanta, you got to move somebody west, and that's
expand west, right?
Well, the big conversation too is, the first thought was, the Detroit Red Wings. Detroit has no intention of moving back that direction. Neither does Columbus, and I think that's where, finding another team that's willing to make that jump.
No, and it's not going to happen because, and I think you're right, and I think it's not going to be a one-team expansion, right? Because again, the NHL likes its even numbers. Seattle now 8 teams each division, 16 in the West, 16 in the East, right? It's nice, right? Even numbers are people's, CDO, not OCD.
That's math that I can handle,
right? Which I thought you could handle more math than that, but anyways,
it's a pretty low bar.
Could you see it this way? Let's just say Atlanta, or not Atlanta. Let's just say that Arizona stays where it's at, right? Let's just say the NHL expands Atlanta and Houston together, or Kansas City. I could see Kansas City.
Atlanta, Houston, Kansas City, Quebec. 2 in the East, 2 in the West.
I think they would do it in 2 chunks.
Yeah.
So 2. So you get Atlanta, then you get Kansas City. Kansas City is good, but I wonder, because the thing with Houston is, yes, it's a big market, but there's also some different challenges in Houston that would give it maybe a leg down on, say, Kansas City. And Kansas City also, we talk about club hockey, and it's kind of a uniquely, sort of a niche hockey market, but I think could do well given the right circumstances. But how about this in the West? Salt Lake City?
Yeah.
Because you think if it's Kansas City or Houston, that's the Central Division, right? But you need something in the West. You already have 3 teams in California, so that ain't happening. You've got Vegas.
Atlanta would be in with Carolina, Florida, things like that. And then Quebec City would be up where Boston, Montreal, those guys are. So,
So, but could you, and are there other options out there, right, for hockey? I don't know. Could they go back to Hartford?
Too small of a market, I think.
Too small of a market, probably.
Just because it's oversaturated with so many other teams around there too,
that's really the big problem. Again, New York, technically 3 teams, that kind of thing. So,
and the talking point too, literally and figuratively, is Quebec is a predominantly French only speaking city in terms of Quebec City versus Montreal. You have a pretty good mix of people who are French Canadian, people who are more English speaking, that sort of thing too. So you kind of have that little interprovincial war, so to speak. So,
sure.
You have that intrigue too. The Canadian dollar is a big factor too. It's much easier to put a team in the U.S. versus Canada as well too. But I don't know. We're going to have an interesting month of May, I think. Is that fair to say?
It's fair. Atlanta could work. Again, like I said, a lot of it goes, the face value is this team. The team was terrible, and it was. But if you just dig a little bit deeper, is that the team didn't really have a chance to be good, right? They never were really given the players / the tools to be successful on and off the ice. So I think if you do have a group that's committed to having a successful franchise there, it'll work, right? And they've got to have the resources, right? I think if there is an expansion, Seattle will 750. I think we're talking $1 billion per franchise moving forward. I really do. Other question is timing, right? Is this, let's just say this gains momentum. Is it really this quick? I don't know if it is. I think there's got to be at least a 5-year gap. I would
No, it's going to take some time because the biggest issue is buildings. Like if you're going to Houston, for example, you got to say, are the Rockets comfortable having a hockey rink in that building? Could they make that work? Or if you don't, if you're Salt Lake City, do you have a facility that's big enough or can be created quick enough to make things happen? The NHL and college hockey, for that matter, is in a precariously exciting time where there's so many avenues at the middle of the spoked wheel, so to speak, that they can go, and they just have to make sure that they pick the right path, so to speak. It's gonna be a wild ride. I mean, the game of hockey is ever changing. I think that's quite evident. But yeah, I mean, we're just going to have to keep our eye on it and see, of course. NHL playoffs still going on here. The Oilers and Vegas doing battle. I think the Knights are up 2-1 at the time of recording right now. As far as
also just out of the game with injury, so Aiden Hill on the Nets, so that could be trouble for Vegas. That's a long-term type injury. Obviously, we don't know the extent of it, but that's huge. Brossoit has looked really good since essentially taking the job from Logan Thompson. So we'll have to see, but Vegas needs to get even, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, Lincoln leading Fargo 4-3, 7 minutes left in period number 2. All of those goals scored in the first period, by the way. 7-goal first in that one. This series could go 5 very easily. By the time the show comes out, we'll know. But yeah, so keep an eye on that one, of course. And then any other news that we find out related to either Arizona, college hockey, whatever it may be, we will definitely keep you up to date. My thought is we will probably have a somewhat normal release, probably either Sunday, maybe Monday at the latest, Tuesday morning, like it was this week as well too. But we'll kind of keep you updated. We're trying to kind of follow things a little bit with the NHL playoffs and some of the NHL news that's coming out. So that's kind of why we waited, especially till tonight with the NHL draft lottery. It just makes a lot more sense to cover it until our hearts were shattered and totally disappointed in this, and we regret everything. But with that being said, that will do it for episode 161. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Perix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.